The 2024-25 Premier League season ended quite a while ago, unless you count the Club World Cup. But because I couldn't be bothered to wait for that to finish, and I don't really care much about it anyway, the Club World Cup isn't gonna be considered in these rankings. It hasn't even finished yet. I just thought I'd make this video now while the rest of the season is still reasonably fresh in people's minds. I just thought it would be a good idea to have a look at how every single team in the Champions League this season has done overall in all competitions. Now, I've decided that this tier list isn't just going to be based on how well they've done, but how well they've done for the expectation. So for example, Villa reaching the quarter-final of the Champions League. That's good, but not amazing by most teams' standards, but for Aston Villa, it's going to mean a lot more because it's not something you would expect them to do. Now, we have quite a lot of teams to go through, so I think we should just get started. I'll be going quite quickly through each, but I'll try to cover all the relevant points and hopefully rank them in a way that reflects how well they've done this season. So before we start, just make sure you're subscribed. You can always unsubscribe later if you don't want to be subscribed. I don't know why you would not want to subscribe really, so might as well do that now, and then we can get started. So as you can see here, I've got my tier list. It's got elite season, exceeded expectations, solid season, bang average, and diabolical. That's just for the absolute worst teams this season. I'm going to start with Atalanta. Now, this is a difficult one because in the Champions League they did slightly underperform. They went out against Club Brugge. That was in the little playoff thing, so they didn't reach the last 16 in the end. And that matchup against Brugge, you have to say it's one that they would be expected to win. And especially after winning the Europa League last season, beating that wonderful Leverkusen team, of course, 3-0 in the final, stopped them from going unbeaten all season, stopped them from winning the treble, and it was a very, very good performance. Atalanta, under the experienced management of Gianpier Gasperini this season, not anymore, but they were this season. Players like Ademola Lookman and Retegui had very good campaigns, as they were expected to, at least in Lookman's case for sure. He was considered to be one of the best forwards in the world following that Europa League win. Got nominated for the Ballon d'Or, of course, but Atalanta's season overall, I think it just sneaks into solid season ahead of bang average. Third in Serie A, which is again around where you would expect them to finish, behind Napoli and Inter, of course. They did very well at the start of the season. They were sort of in the title race for a bit. I actually saw Atalanta live against AC Milan, and they weren't bad. They won that game 1-0. Neither team really performed in that match. Obviously, that's only one game. I can't really judge anything off that. I just thought I'd bring it up. I guess overall this season, they were about as good as you would have expected them to be in 2024-25. Possibly a little bit worse, but I think it would be harsh to put them at bang average, considering that they did do pretty well in Serie A, third place, so near the bottom of solid season for them. So now let's move on to Arsenal, and well, it's typical Arsenal, a third consecutive season finishing second in the Premier League. But I think I'm going to put them in exceeded expectations because of what they did in the Champions League. When they were first drawn against Real Madrid in the Champions League, I think the general expectation was that they would lose that match. Madrid with Mbappe, Bellingham, all the star power that they have. Yes, it wasn't their best season, they were underperforming, but don't take away from Arsenal's achievement. Beating Madrid 5-1, dominating them over two legs, is a massive achievement for them. They also put up a decent fight against PSG in the following rounds. There were definitely times in that match where Arsenal were actually the better team, even though overall they were outclassed by a very strong PSG team who we'll get to later on. You also have to remember that Arsenal did face injury struggles this season. They can't use that as an excuse for not winning anything. Obviously, the expectation is kind of that they should be going for trophies at the moment, and they were close, but not really close enough. 4-0 defeat to Newcastle in the Carabao Cup semi-finals. It feels like they don't really have what it takes to go all the way, but still exceeded expectations because of what happened in the Champions League. Back to that point on injuries, Gabriel Saka spent some time on the sidelines. So I think overall Arsenal can still be pretty happy with the season, but the trophies have got to come at some point. That's why I just can't put them in elite season. I do also need to bring up Arsenal's defensive record as well. Saliba and Gabriel at the back have proven to be a quality partnership over the last few years, and this season, there was not a single match in all competitions where Arsenal conceded more than 2 goals. So yeah, I think Arsenal overall still had a good season. They just about managed to exceed the expectation of finishing second in the Prem and doing not very well in the Champions League by finishing second in the Prem and doing quite well in the Champions League. Next up is Aston Villa. I'm putting them straight into exceeded expectations. They reached the quarter-final of the Champions League, as I said earlier. Yes, they only faced Club Brugge in the last 16, but Club Brugge beat Atalanta, who are a pretty good team. New signings like Onana, Tielemans, Rashford and Asensio really helped to strengthen this Villa squad. In the Premier League, they did really well. Didn't quite manage to qualify for the Champions League again, but finished 6th. Probably should have qualified for the Champions League. if not for some poor refereeing in their game against Man United. But yeah, overall just a very good season for Villa again. It's brilliant what Unai Emery's been doing there. They're tactically very strong, able to compete with some of Europe's best. We saw it in games against Bayern and obviously in the Premier League. They've shown that they're able to compete, and I think they exceeded my expectations, particularly in the Champions League. Now next up is Sparta Prague, and I'll be honest, I haven't seen this team play outside of that short clip of Haaland scoring some incredible acrobatic goal in a game which Manchester City won 5-0. And after looking at the results, it's safe to say that it hasn't been the best season for Sparta Prague. 4th in the Czech League, which is not where they would want to be finishing. They weren't really in the title race at all. And in the Champions League, they weren't much better. 4 points overall, 1 win, 1 draw, which saw them eliminated in the league phase. So yeah, diabolical season. Right, now moving on to Atletico Madrid. They had a decent season. 3rd place in La Liga, kind of where you'd expect them to finish, but there was a point in the season where they looked like they could go on and win it. They were definitely competing for the title around halfway through. I guess they started to drop off towards the end. They had a respectable Champions League campaign, losing on penalties to Real Madrid. Julian Alvarez with that really unfortunate slip on a penalty that was disallowed. So I think Atletico can hold their heads high overall. Alvarez actually had a pretty good season, 7 goals in 10 Champions League matches. He was their big money signing from the summer. Gallagher's done alright as well. So yeah, a decent season for Atletico Madrid, but they're lucky we're not taking the Club World Cup into account, because they really weren't very good in that. Out in the group stage, losing 4-0 to PSG and finishing behind Botafogo. But of course, I'm not counting the Club World Cup, so that doesn't count. Atletico go in solid season. Now next is Leverkusen, and I'm also going to put them in solid season. Yes, they weren't nearly as good as they were last season when they went invincible in Germany, lost just 1 game in all competitions. That was against Atalanta in the Europa League. Xabi Alonso has proven to be an incredible manager, that's why he's gone off to Real Madrid, but in his last season in Germany, I think Leverkusen still did okay. Considering the players that they have, obviously with Wirtz, Tar and Frimpong, they have standouts, but squad-wise, they're not nearly as good as Bayern Munich, and they finished 2nd behind them. There wasn't really much of a title race, but with the way Bayern tend to dominate German football, there isn't too much shame in not really competing for that 1st place spot in the league. In the Champions League as well, Leverkusen met their end against Bayern in the last 16. There were games in the Champions League where they didn't really perform. I remember watching them against Liverpool, losing 3-0. So there were some games where they didn't really show up, but I think overall it is a solid season considering the level that you'd expect Leverkusen to be at. I know they were brilliant last season, but this was only Xabi Alonso's 2nd full season in charge, and following such a brilliant but also grueling campaign last year where they went so far and performed so well in every competition, it definitely makes sense that they slipped a little bit. So I think solid season is a fair placement for them. And now Bologna, straight into exceeded expectations. Yes, they finished 9th in the league. Yes, they didn't really pull up any trees in the Champions League. They were actually eliminated in 28th with just 6 points in the league phase. None of that matters because Bologna won a trophy, and for a team like Bologna to have that kind of success, it's just not something you expect. It's a massive moment for the club. It ended a 51-year trophy drought. The last trophy Bologna won was the Coppa Italia, which they won this year, in 1974. But it really doesn't matter how they did it or what happened for the rest of the season. Just by winning a trophy, a small team like Bologna, they have to go into the exceeded expectations tier. Now, there's no one in the bang average tier yet, but Dortmund could go in there. 4th place in the Bundesliga is not ideal for a club like Dortmund, who you would expect to be competing at the very least for the top 2. Yet at some points in this season, they were more mid-table, particularly under Nuri Sahin early in the season. They were one of the most underperforming teams in Europe, considering their recent success of reaching the Champions League final. But with the appointment of Niko Kovac in February, their form has seen a dramatic U-turn, and towards the end of the season, they rapidly climbed up the table to secure a top 4 finish. It's still not good enough for what you'd expect from Dortmund, but you have to credit them for the turnaround that they've had this season. Now in the Champions League, it's been a bit of a different story. Dortmund actually had a decent campaign, getting to the quarterfinals with Guirassy, the first player to hit 10 goals. They bowed out against Barcelona, but put up a really good fight in the second leg when it seemed like they were already out. And I think overall they did enough towards the end of the season to sneak into that solid season tier. And honestly, I think Guirassy and Kovac deserve a lot more credit for the job they've done done this season. Guirassy, by far Dortmund's most consistent player. He carried on performing even when his club weren't. With 21 goals in 30 Bundesliga appearances, 13 goals in 14 matches in the Champions League, you have to say Guirassy is among the best strikers in the world right now. Probably not in that top bracket with the likes of Kane, Lewandowski, Haaland and Mbappe, but I'd put him in the top 10 strikers in the world right now. And obviously what Niko Kovac has achieved in such a short space of time in charge of Dortmund, rescuing what was on track to be a disastrous season and qualifying for the Champions League against all odds. So yeah, because of all that, Dortmund sneak into solid season. Now it's time to focus on Young Boys, favourite team of Michael Jackson of course. For legal reasons that was a joke. Young Boys have been kind of bad this season though. You see what I did there? Yeah, bad. Anyway, Young Boys finished last in the Champions League phase with 0 points, not even a single draw or win, and in the Swiss Super League they were third, which isn't terrible, but by Young Boys standards it's not ideal. They want to be going for the title, so yeah, it's really not been a great season for them. They haven't looked dangerous at all. They're going in diabolical tier. Now next up is Celtic, and I would say they had a pretty good season. They won the Scottish Premiership pretty comfortably, 92 points compared to Rangers 75, and in the Champions League they finished 21st in the league phase. Not too bad, they got through to the playoffs and put up a really good fight against Bayern Munich. They actually competed. Unfortunately they did get knocked out there, but I think for Celtic the way they played against Bayern Munich was really impressive. Also big shout out to Kasper Schmeichel, who's still playing in goal for Celtic. He had some standout games in the Champions League as well. I don't remember him making any cock-ups.
Did I say cock-ups?
So yeah, I think it's fair to put Celtic in exceeded expectations. Now on to Club Brugge. We've mentioned them a few times already this season. They beat Atalanta in the Champions League, went out to Aston Villa in the last 16. But I think overall in the Champions League they did exceed expectations, but the thing that's stopping them from going into that tier is the fact that they didn't manage to win the Belgian Pro League. They finished second behind Union Songolese in the Championship rounds and behind Genk in the regular season. The Belgian Pro League actually works really weirdly. The league kind of splits into two separate trophies. I'm not sure how that really works, but Bruges finished second in both, which is a bit underwhelming for a team that often wins the Belgian title. And now we've got Barcelona, which is a very interesting one. They obviously reached the semi-finals of the Champions League, won La Liga, so they definitely have a claim for the elite season tier. Only losing out to Inter during extra time after a very good comeback from Inter Milan, who we'll get onto very shortly. But Barcelona also played some of the best football. It was entertaining. Their high line defensively worked sometimes, didn't work some other times, but they did have a solid season still. Completely dominated Spanish football. Lamine Yamal, Rafinha, Lewandowski, they were all very lethal in front of goal. Lamine Yamal, Rafinha, Lewandowski, they all had brilliant seasons. Pedri in the midfield, he is an amazing player, very good at passing, defensively, able to win the ball back. I think he has the most ball recoveries in Europe this season, and yeah, overall Hansi Flick has got this Barca team playing really well. They're definitely going to go into elite season. And now for Bayern Munich, an incredibly similar season results wise to Barcelona. They dominated German football, won the Bundesliga, but went out to Inter Milan in the Champions League. Harry Kane had another great season. He didn't score as many as he did last year, but he's still up there with the best, and Elise as well in his debut season at Bayern, very promising. And I think overall the football Bayern played under Kompany this season, massive improvement on last season under Tuchel. But the problem here is that I don't think they exceeded my expectations, because unlike in Spain, Germany doesn't have as much competition. You'd expect Bayern to win the Bundesliga title. They didn't win the DFB Pokal, and in the Champions League, yes, they were good, but they only just snuck past Celtic, beat Leverkusen, and then fell against Inter. It feels really harsh to put them 2 tiers below Barcelona, but I just can't say that they exceeded my expectations. It's possible to put them into elite season, but I think I'm going to leave them in solid season, because for Bayern standards, this is an average season, which is crazy to say, but that's how consistent and dominant Bayern have generally been over the last sort of 10 years. And now for Inter Milan, a team that have come up a lot in this video, but are probably the most difficult team to place on this tier list. They've had such a unique season in that they were a few games away from winning a treble. They were in the Champions League final, but ended up losing it. They were competing for Serie A until the final day, but ended up losing that to Napoli. Lost in the Coppa Italia semi-finals against AC Milan, so ended up going trophyless, which is obviously far below the expectations for Inter Milan. Unlike Arsenal, Arsenal, you would definitely expect them to win something in Serie A. They're the best team in Italy squad-wise, and they had the highest expectations out of any team in Italy going into this season. Also, the way they lost that Champions League final, a 5-0 defeat, makes it really difficult for me to put them anywhere in the sort of elite season, exceeded expectations tiers, despite reaching the Champions League final and beating Bayern and Barca when they weren't expected to. Those are huge victories that we can't ignore. So I'm really stuck on this one. I'm just going to leave them in solid season for now, because I can't really say that they exceeded expectations by winning nothing. But the way that they performed in the Champions League really can't be ignored, so it's a difficult decision, but I'm just going to leave them in solid season. Let me know in the comments what tier you think they should go into. I think what makes this one difficult is comparing the value of winning trophies and getting results to the performances overall and the achievements that the team has made without actually getting that success at the end. But for Inter, I guess you just have to say they go in solid season because they didn't win a trophy and they were expected to. But I'm really unsure about this one. Anyway, let's move on to RB Salzburg, and I don't think they've had a very good season, to be honest. They didn't do well in the Champions League, finishing 34th out of 36, just 3 points, 1 win from 8 games. And in the Austrian Bundesliga, they also underperformed. 3rd in the main season and 2nd in the championship playoff. They have a similar system in Austria to the one in Belgium, where the league kind of splits. But yeah, you would expect Salzburg to probably win something in the Austrian Bundesliga. It's not the strongest league, and Salzburg over the last decade or so have been really dominant in Austria, so by their standards this has been a really disappointing season, particularly their Champions League performance as well. Just 1 win. They're normally putting up a pretty good fight against the big teams, so they're going in the diabolical tier. And now moving on to our 16th team, the last of part 1 is Shakhtar Donetsk, and they've not had a great season either, to be honest. 27th in the Champions League is not amazing. They were eliminated in the league phase, but in the Ukrainian Premier League they finished 3rd, and you would expect them to do a little bit better in that. Now obviously Donetsk haven't been able to play in their stadium recently and have relocated to Schalke Stadium in Gelsenkirchen in Germany. My point here is that the current circumstances in Ukraine, and particularly in the eastern region where Donetsk is located, is definitely going to have affected the football in some way. So I'm not criticising Shakhtar or their players here, but for the purposes of this video I have to put them into the bottom tier. Nobody in the bang average tier so far, which is interesting. There definitely will be some in part 2, so make sure you stay tuned for that. It should be coming out in a few days, maybe a week, depends when I can be bothered to make it. But in the meantime, feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you later.